Markets Panorama, a podcast by Monetaria. This is episode 22. We do have here a special video interview with Roberto Amore, working for the European Union. The discussion will be focused around growth in Italy, European economics, the way Roberto invests on a personal basis. We'll also discuss some personal matters, which is going to be fun, what Roberto does in his free time. Enjoy the chat. Remember that nothing here is financial advice. Well, it is my honor to have a guest who happens to be a great friend of mine and happens to work at the European Union as well. Roberto Amore. Roby, thank you for joining Markets Panorama.
Thanks for having me.
We tend to speak in Italian between the two of us, but we'll keep it weird in English today. And I will ask you, Roberto, if you want to introduce yourself, what has been your career in the past and what you're doing now for the European Union.
Right. Well, first of all, again, thanks for having me, Nico. It's a pleasure. And I was a lawyer. I specialized in competition law regulated industries. I worked for a couple of big international firms for about 10 years in total. Then decided that I wanted, I guess, to switch from the dark side of the force into playing Obi-Wan or sort of and being a public enforcer. So this is how at least I fooled myself with at the time. So I joined the European Commission, DG Competition, where I did a bunch of competition law cases in the energy industry for about 5 years, and then somebody decided that I was quite terrible as a lawyer, and so it was much safer for me and the others that I would pretend to be an economist. Something I strongly disagree with, not the assumption, the workaround. So a couple of years ago, I joined the Commission's task force that is handling the RRF, the Recovery and Resilience Facility. And I follow Italy. The Italian plan, it is worth 191.5 billion euros until 2026. And I'm based in beautiful yet terrible Rome. Oh, now that I say this, former lawyer, now you technocrat, it sounds really boring. And it's no surprise I'm wearing a blue tie and a U flag behind me, and you look like Tony Stark. But okay, that's and I know you normally have a bottle of wines all around you, but that's the way it is. That's beauty of entrepreneurship, I guess.
But you are incredibly more professional and very good looking at the moment. So thank you for representing an institution in the right way.
Yeah.
So it's okay. So you live now in Rome. You work on behalf of the Commission. And in short, you are basically the person from Europe giving a check to Italy, right? To go ahead with specific plans.
Right. Yeah. That's the job of the task force. It's a coincidence of, for various reasons, I'm based in Rome because I'm also the European semester officer here along with other two colleagues of mine. But there is a task force that is based in Brussels, and we're all part of the same group, and we follow. The Italian desk, of course, follows Italy, and particularly I'm following some of the big ticket reforms, and that's the idea until 2026. You know that the plan is a combination of reforms and investments. So far I've been following more the reforms, the public procurement reform, the annual competition law, which is close to my heart, given the previous job, and that's more or less what we do. We every time the country makes a payment request under the RRP, the Recovery and Resilience Plan, which happens more or less every 6 months, let's say at the end of June, at the end of December, more or less, we check that all the milestones and targets due to that semester were actually achieved. And if they are, then we issue the payment. And Italy has already received, I think, 67 billion so far. And now there is the third payment request is still pending for about 19 billion. So that gives you, and it's supposed to be decided very soon. That gives you the magnitude of the plan and why we work on checking carefully that all the objectives, the milestones and targets, as we call them, are actually achieved. Once we reach the same result the government has reached, that is everything is fine, then we issue the payment. So there is a bit of delay. In the meantime, of course, the government pays whatever works or investments they have to make. So there is an exposure And this is why, people keep saying that the RRF, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, is a performance-based instrument. It's not an expenditure instrument. Not that you go there with a receipt and say, okay, this is what I spent, and now you give me the money back. It's really a very tight combination of milestones and targets. 527 actually in the case of Italy, in which one could be, the justice reform, just to give you the idea of how it works. So yeah, it's an extremely ambitious plan. It's the biggest one in Europe in absolute terms, and this is why there's been scrutiny not only by the Commission, but the rest of Europe as well.
Fantastic. Well, and let me ask you then, a third of our listeners tend to be from Italy. And in the podcast, we usually focus on big regions, which are the US and Europe in terms of economics. But let me ask you, what is your point of view on the future of growth and in general economics in Italy going forward, if you have a point of view on numbers or the big picture view?
Right. Okay, now here, consistently with my boring introduction and to be as tedious as I can, I need to make a disclaimer. Of course, I'm speaking on a personal capacity. I don't represent the European Commission here. I don't represent anybody. I don't represent even myself here. It's a friendly chat. Yeah, let's start with Italy. I mean, Italy, when it comes to economic performance, it's really the quintessential of mixed feelings because you expect the worst, and then you get sometimes positive results. I mean, what we have is that basically Italy reached the output level and the real GDP level pre-pandemic already in mid 2022, and kept growing the third quarter 2022, and then entering into a relatively bad quarter, but not too bad, and at the end of 2022. And the most recent news is that, as you might have seen, the Ministry for Economy issued the Economic and Financial Document. And there you also see some pretty good positive news, because basically you have an upward revision of the GDP for growth for 2022. So it's 0.9 with unchanged scenario, probably 1% with a change in policy. But the news is that it's higher than projected last autumn, which I think was 0.3. And then a slight downward revision for 2024, where you have 1.4% instead of, I think it was in the region of 1.9 or 2%. But I'll stop here. I mean, if now everybody's screaming, oh, it's only 1.4%, 1.5, whatever in 2024. But if you look at Italy's performance over the past 20 years, 1.4 is amazingly high. I mean, I think it did well to the same extent only once in 20 years. So it's already amazing. But okay, the good news is that 2022 was still a pretty good year, despite everything, with 3.7% growth, which was worse than originally forecasted the previous year, but better than forecasted after the war started. And then, of course, the phenomenal 2021 with 7% growth. I mean, you should always remind that the rebound after the pandemic was really great. This is no surprise. The real GDP level went back to pre-pandemic scenario relatively soon after the end of COVID-19. So I mean, the outlook is not too bad. And the last thing, which is I think where the mixed feelings would start, is the debt to GDP ratio, which is the kind of things we always look at in Brussels. Because the latest DEF says that it's actually better than expected. For 2022, it was 144.4, so it's 1.3% less than expected, which is good news. And then it's on a downward, it's in a debt reduction path for the forthcoming years until I think 2025. It's going to be most likely less than 141. But I'll stop here and say, I mean, it's good news that it's been revised downwards, but it's still amazingly high comparing to the EU governance rules, where you should have 60%. And then so the reality check is, Italy has been more resilient than expected. It's going very well comparing to what most of the other countries expected, but we need to be cautious. And even if you look at the deficit, as you know, the Eurostat has issued an opinion according to which then Italy had to revise the classification of the tax credits for private investment in energy efficiency. The super bonus, 110%, is the most famous one. And as a result of that, our deficit is, I think, 8% for 2022, which is high and again, amazingly higher than the 3% of the euros. And it doesn't really change, it doesn't affect the debt so much. It changes a little bit the deficit profile, the time profile, with most likely the impact of the super bonus being front loaded to 2022, which is, I mean, good news, probably not too bad, at least. But the crucial point is that now everybody is okay, super happy about the results of 2021, okay-ish with 2022, a bit worried about 2023, and let's see about 2024. But the most important point is that the general escape clause of the Stability and Growth Pact will be deactivated at the end of this year. So as of January 2024, Italy will be in the spotlight again, as it used to be before the pandemic. So people will start screaming that the debt is too high. So I was trying to make sense out of all this mess, and I mean, if you look at what the analyst says, or the big heads, or even the commissioners, the rating companies, by the way, S&P was the last one, but even the others, I mean, they said a lot of different things about Italy, and again, because there's mixed feelings, but they all have one thing in common. That is that we all know that Italy, Italy's cure, or what Italy has always put forward as a recipe to get out of all this exposure, is to increase growth. And what they say that, in order for you to increase growth in the short term, you need to implement the recovery and resilience plan. All of them have this thing in common. Then they say different things on, how to address public expenditure, high pension expenditure, aging population, unemployment, which is, more worrying in Italy than in the rest of Europe right now, the lack of skills, or the need to reskill and upskill a lot of workforce. So the labor market is not going very well. And we have a lot of pensions are super expensive. They all say different things, but one thing in common is that you need to go ahead with the RRP implementation. And why is that? Because the RRP, as we were saying at the beginning, contains a lot of reforms, but not just for the sake of it. It's not just that you do the justice reform because you want to do it, or the public procurement reform, or the competition law one. It's because all these reforms put together, they increase the business, or they improve the business environment, and you attract more investment. So it's not just that you're injecting a lot of money. So it's more than 200 if you combine the Italian plan plus the complementary fund, and plus then you have also the cohesion funds, the cohesion policy, which is a lot of money coming between until 2027. It's not only that money that you are injecting, which is also good, but it's the positive spillover, which are not quantifiable in terms of attracting investments. So if you are actually able to improve the business environment, and that companies will know at least that if you want to do business in Italy, you have legal certainty, that you have faster public administration. Oh, sorry, I didn't mention the reform of the public administration, which is the big ticket reform in the plan. And you have all this, you will get much better result than just the money, which is already pretty high. So, and it is where I think this is where all these comments come from when they focus on RRP implementation. So the investments, yes, but keep their home. So my tip to you, I mean, to whoever looks at Italy, is of course looking at the number is always a great thing to do, but here more than ever, you need to look on whether the government is able to stick to the reform agenda, because that's already an indicator of whether or not growth will be enough to offset the other bad numbers that we have. And there again, because growth has always been indicated as cure to reduce this number into a downward debt reduction path over the next at least a couple of years, and probably longer. So yeah, it becomes less technical, probably from your point of view, a bit more political, but it's already an indicator when you see that there is a delay, not so much in the expenditure, but in the reform agenda. Then that's an alarm, or at least an alert that you should put in your system to say, okay, things could get worse in the future.
Okay, well, thank you, Robbie. Super insightful. Actually, in brief, we see Italy coming, from the past with a big baggage, including debt or debt to GDP and inefficiencies. It has been doing that better than expected in the past couple of years, better 2021 with the rebounds. The future is challenging. Growth will be the cure, and it's beautiful to understand and perceive from what you're saying that actually Europe is and is going to be the partner for Italy, not only to give the money, but also to prepare for that future growth, which is something that the public doesn't necessarily perceive. So thank you for that. If we can zoom out from Italy, which is a beautiful point of view, Europe, economics. What is your point of view? Future growth, what is going on in the medium term? The European Central Bank in May will soon, I think, hike interest rates. The market is debating between 25 or 50 basis points right now, but core inflation is still high. So the environment is an environment of short-term recovery, energy prices going down, but we don't know what is going to happen in the medium term. What's your take on Europe?
Okay, let me start first. This is an interesting time to make this interview because it's very timely. I mean, we have the IMF, I think, releasing you know this better than I do. I think the IMF is releasing the regional outlook on Europe in a couple of days at the end of this week. And then, more interesting, at least from my point of view, you have the European Commission issuing the spring package, and where you have the in-depth reviews of the countries in excessive imbalances, as Italy, Greece, and others. And it's super important because there you will also see the country-specific recommendations, what Brussels, says about all this. And as we speak, I think, or at least 1 hour after we speak, there will be some news from the Commission in terms of the European economic governance review. All these things you should see them together. So I think this is an interesting time because you will get more, insights from the Commission in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So May would be a crucial month as usual, but even more so than previous years. Well, the IMF was saying that Europe faces, at least this was my sense of the press conference, that you need to defeat inflation, which is in double digits in some emerging economies in Europe, but not only those. You have to sustain recovery. Okay, there again, I'm biased, so I agree. And you have to find safeguard, fiscal sustainability, and this again is more or less, I think, in line with what the Commission says. But overall, I mean, again, Europe, as I was saying for Italy, Europe entered 2023 on a healthier footing than everybody expected. The benchmark gas prices went down to pre-pandemic level. Not quite sure whether this is being passed on to consumers, but this is what we hope. And here I'm, wearing again the competition lawyer hat, but this is what Europe expects to happen at some point. And the economic sentiment has been really good. I mean, comparing to what we forecasted last year. And I think demand is also quite strong. I mean, there are some issues in manufacturing, which is a bit weak. But surprisingly, we haven't seen a big effect on the labor market, which, differently from Italy, is pretty strong. And unemployment is, I think, at very low levels. It was at the end of 2022, and you have better, data than I have, but I think still is. So I think the combination of this thing, particularly, the economic sentiment, will kind of offset the potential impact of inflation, and will avoid, most likely, hopefully, to get into a recession, even if narrowly so, but still out of an actual a recession. I mean, it's funny though, because if you have one quarter with -10, everybody is okay. But then if you have two quarters with -0.1%, it's recession. Okay. But there, this is your job to make sense out of this. So I think Europe is doing well, and what's important is what's going to happen next with the deactivation of the general escape clause of the Stability and Growth Pact. Where what does it mean? That then the old hated two rules of the 3% of the deficit to GDP and 60% of the debt to GDP ratio will kick in again. And this is why countries like Greece and Italy and Portugal and possibly Spain, although Spain has been doing very well, this better than I do. Even smaller ones, Cyprus. I mean, they've been having imbalances issues, and they will be put on the spotlight. But more generally, this is where you will see what Europe can do in terms of keeping the member states together. Because these two parameters will stay. What will change is how you address the issue, if you have one. So how you frame the debt reduction path. It's not going to be like a super aggressive, imposition by Brussels into the member states, but it's going to be something, I guess, more negotiated, and where the member states will have more ownership on how to reduce debt. And this is great news, because this is the great departure from the past. And hopefully will allow us to get out of this oaks versus doves debate, which is not interesting at all. You plan how to reduce debt, and then you enforce it. And of course, debt reduction means, again, reforms and a bit of an investment. One thing that I would expect from the Commission is to say out loud, as it is already done in March with the fiscal guidance, to be very careful in keeping on with these expansionary measures. So far, I think the member states have done the right thing to support households and businesses. Take Germany, but not only Germany, because that's the most famous example. But even Italy, with several aid decrees, if you add them up, it's a lot of expenditure to kind of offset the energy crisis, and not only the energy crisis, but the effects of decreasing raw materials and effects on households. And the member states, not only this one, but all the member states cannot keep doing that. They need to be more selective. So I don't think the Commission will be saying, be super conservative, but be more targeted. Yes. So you cannot just adopt catch-all provisions and just put money there as we did in 2022 after the war started. So this is an advice that it probably is coming as fiscal guidance to all the member states. And it makes a lot of sense. It's coherent with the medium-term debt reduction plan that some countries will have to adopt following the new governance. We'll see what comes up. But in terms of forecast, you just have to wait a couple of weeks. Let me just say one thing about inflation. And here I'm happy not to be a lawyer, not to be an economist, and kind of, so I'm not too stressed about the future only, but I can linger on the past a little bit. And if you look at Europe, you have to keep in mind, and over the past 4 years, there were two revolutionary events, I think. One, and both of them are positive, but the first one it's easier to understand. The first one is the Next Gen EU, where the RRP, the Recovery and Resilience Plan, is the facility is. It's a huge amount of money. It's revolutionary because for the first time you have Europe actually going out on the market, borrowing money and give support to the member states. And if you look at the timing, it's also amazing. And trust me when I say this is the fastest reaction that I've ever seen by the Commission. So you have the pandemic kicking in December 2020. You have the own resource decision, and February 21 the RRF regulation, and by April 2021 most of the member states presenting their recovery and resilience plan. It's fast in European terms, and it was a quick reaction. It's a huge amount of money, and it got out of this austerity debate, and there again the debate oaks versus doves. It was a unanimous decision to say we need to support member states in this period, and the way Brussels reacted was amazing, and this is why I think there is a trust in the European institution now higher than ever before. So this is the first revolutionary thing. But the second one, which is probably considered not too important for analysts, is that even before that, there was the decision to adopt the first real industrial policy in Europe. And this was pre-pandemic. Industrial policy is based on two things. One is the digital transition, which for me is tautological, because of course you just taking into account what's happening around the world, and you need to do anyway. So that wasn't that revolutionary. But the second one, yes, and that's the green transition, or the Green Deal, or the Fit for 55, or whatever you want to call it. That stuff in 2019. And I think we all knew at the time that this was going to be really costly. Costly not in terms of economics for the member state, but also in terms of relationship. It was, I think, Brussels' own polite, respectful, elegant, and institutional manner of declaring war to the world, to some extent, to use an aggressive language. That is, we're going to fight climate change no matter what. We don't care about China. We don't care about the US, the previous administration, at least. We are just going to do it, and we're going to set ourselves under a very ambitious path and deadlines, and we're going to defeat the climate change, and we're going to be carbon neutral in a short time, really short time. This was going to be costly. We knew it already, costly for the member states. But then the pandemic kicked in, and then after that, the war kicked in. So you have a combination of these things, and everything now is mixed up. And inflation that is coming out of all of this, the rebound from the pandemic, the increase in consumption, the increase in raw materials, the interest rates going up, is all mixed up. But to me, and I couldn't find any reliable source or analysis about this. We need to distinguish what are, and I use the term improperly, the objective improperly, the exogenous reasons for inflation from our own policy decisions. Because at some point, what I'm trying to say is that we would have seen some of this increase in prices anyway, translated indirectly from the policy choices that we made already back in 2019. And don't get me wrong, I'm super proud of what Europe is doing with the Green Deal. I think it was a bold move against everybody else, but we know that this is going to have a cost in terms of relationship with the rest of the world, the carbon leakages, relationship with the other countries. And in turn, the cost of sustaining the transition, which is the most visible one, it was going to impact us anyway. So is this interesting for you? Probably not, because inflation is inflation, whether it's exogenous or endogenous, we don't care, unless you want to bitch about central banks, or unless you're Paul Krugman, or both. But in planning how to get out of this, how to get out of 2023 and enter 2024 in a more prudent manner, I think it still makes sense to try to see what is that is coming and is going to stay, and what is hopefully going to fade away in the following 12 months, because now everybody says, okay, inflation will decrease by the end of probably 2024, so that in 2025 we'll all be happy. Yes, but again, the policy choices we made need to be taken into account in terms of cost for member states, which in turn will have an impact on public expenditure and these parameters I was referring to.
Okay, thank you for this. My comment would be that there's, inflation can be good as well. It's not only bad, especially when policy choices or spending will generate future growth or will fix problems in the future. It becomes bad when it's vicious and it grows, and so will invite people to spend less in the future. But I think, good if Europe had and has a plan to fix some issues, including climate change, with some spending, and that will make inflation emerge. What I think is great to hear, and that people normally wouldn't have the opportunity to hear, is that the European Union in general is a big partner. Sometimes it's perceived like, a ruler enforcing things. Is a big partner in terms of allowing fiscal flexibility, as you mentioned earlier, but within a framework of fiscal stability. So governments spend money, but don't spend it, be more focused, be more targeted. Great if it wants to pursue, things which are good for the planet, despite other administrations being flexible. And so it's very interesting to get this perspective as partner instead of enemy, of member states. And so, thank you for shedding the light on that. I would move on at this point, somehow from the super insightful perspective on Italy and Europe towards a bit on what you do as an individual. We'll get into the deeply personal level later on in a few minutes. But as this podcast is about economics and growth, but also investing and, the markets, or at least we markets have very short-term focus and is about growth today, what equities or stocks do. You have a lot of knowledge. You have this institutional perspective using public information, of course, but how do you approach investing, you personally? Because we have part of the audience being very professional investors and half looking for guidance. Is it easy for you? Do you exactly know what to do? Where do you invest? Whatever you want to share with us.
That's an easy, it's a 10-second reply. I don't invest.
Okay.
No, I mean, I invest only in equity. This is what I used to do, and what I used to do pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, where the markets, by the way, were going relatively well. But of course, I'm not the happiest person lately. Now the markets are going as probably I'm too exposed. And the first page of Finance for Dummies, I haven't read, evidently, if you look at my portfolio, which is diversified. But yes, no. I mean, I'm cautious right now because, again, I've been exposed a lot. I am so much interested in the macroeconomics dynamics right now that I'm not following too closely the financial markets, but this is where I would rely on monetaria. So I would rely more on you. I mean, I think it's, let me say this because you summarize it very well. I mean, this is a very topical moment, I think, where we'll see a change in policy by the US and Europe more for sure. Just if you think just the economic governance itself, it's a major turn. And then we need to wait how the relationship with Russia and the rest of the world will play out. Making sense of this, it's really for specialists. So this is where I think amateurs like myself should stay out of making own decisions without, consulting with the experts, because it's really, really difficult. I mean, if my perception is that you would expect the market to go very bad and they're still relatively okay. But so the moment in which they will start really going to shit is just being postponed. So we expected 2022, and then it's becoming 2023, and most likely not even so. It's going to be 2024. So there again, I mean, I'm confused, and this is where I'm frozen and I'm not doing anything. But I, to some extent, envy, but also I really appreciate and value what you guys are doing, because it's amazing to trying to put everything in order and trying to make a sensible forecast of what's going to happen, because of course you make investment based on projections. So yeah, I'm on old, and I will be in this status until things get better. But in the meantime, this is free advertising. Go to Nico and ask him.
Thank you. Wasn't prepared, I swear.
No, not at all. Yeah,
not at all. But no, thanks for sharing your perspective. I mean, there are no right or wrong ways. You can invest tactical in the short term, in the long term. You can go focused, concentrated, or diversified. It's great to have a perspective. I often have these debates even with other investment professionals. It tends to be very complex to know what to buy at what good price, where, and many times we have fear of recessions. Recessions are not showing up, but then markets become more and more expensive, and you wait and you lose ground. And when you buy, maybe markets will go down. It's really, really complex also for the professionals. Monetario, we're trying to put together this engine, trying to see everything and make decisions. But thank you. It's great to know what people tend to do, or the issues that typically have, including not knowing, not having time, or freezing, because at the end is hard for everyone. So
I think people are getting sucked in the great or the decent offering of bonds, and you know there is a tendency, at least what I can see, is that they say, okay, this is the right moment to just fill our portfolio with BTPs and yeah, I mean, the Italian BTP, I mean, the 10-year Italian BTP, I think a couple of weeks ago was quite some points below what it was in October, and then you get, you know, latest news, and you keep getting a great interest. My humble opinion is that be careful, because I mean, again, I mean, I would see what we have to what's going to be the new world in 2024. This is still a pretty peculiar year where you have the SGP suspended, and we still don't know exactly what's going to happen with inflation. So, I mean, this you know race to buy bonds, I don't quite understand. I mean, I think the normal rules apply to be balanced anyway. But okay, that's just my take.
As you know, BTPs pay depending on maturities, you know, above 3 to 4% is very compelling, but you have an element of risk and there is inflation. And so the idea is that bonds, even when they pay you well, in case of recession, they can defend depending on which country issues bonds, depends on the outlook of investors on Italy specifically. They can work well, but they can be problematic as well in case of persistent inflation, for example. And so you say it well. Okay, well, thank you. Let me ask you, as we get to the end of the podcast, we have been on the institutional level, super interesting, asking you about your personal investments. Now, the podcast is about productive time of individuals looking at markets or economics, but individuals also have free time. And so we love asking one last question at the end of the interviews, which goes into the free time and the passion of some of us, wines. Okay, so away from the office.
For a moment, I was afraid you would ask me about Juventus, but likely it's fine. Okay.
We leave football too interesting to you know, another.
No, don't go there.
But you know, in your free time, Robbie. So when you leave the European Union and it's been a busy week, if you don't work in the weekends and you have time to open a bottle of wine, what is your choice? You stay in Italy, you go elsewhere. Both. What do you like?
I always have time to open a bottle, particularly when I'm working for the European Union, and this message would auto-destroy in a few seconds. No, okay, no. Let me say at the outset. I mean, I'm not, you know this, but I'm not a wine expert. I cannot recognize an excellent wine over you know 101 spectator points bottle, but I can equally confidently say that I can place myself in the elite group where you are most likely. That is the top 5% per capita consumption of wine. So that gives me a lot of exposure, I guess. And no, I mean it's the story of this year is that I bought quite some you know nice bottles, but the idea was to buy a lot of bottles from 2019. The reason being that there was the year when my son was born, and my dad did the same for me, with the idea of you know having a bunch of bottles to keep them for years, and then 30, 40 years later, you know, open them up. Now, in my case, I had the pleasure of and you know the luxury of opening them with my dad, but I'm not sure I'll be there in 30, 40 years, but at least my son will be able to open these nice bottles maybe in a lot of time from now, and see how they are. But the point is that so I bought some of them. Particularly, there is one that I like, that is the Grattamacco, is a Bolgheri. Whenever I don't know what to do, I always go with Super Toscans. So Ornellaia, Sassicaia, you know, Tignanello, but particularly the Bolgheri and the Castagneto Carducci area, I think it's a blessed area. And this is after the Cana's wedding miracle of Jesus, I think the other thing was creating the Bolgheri area. So I always go there when I'm in doubt. So I bought a bunch of Bulgari 2019 without really knowing. Just the year was the main guiding principle, and put them away. And then at some point I asked myself, but should I try at least one? Because I mean, is this something that is supposed to age for 40 years? So I tried one. It was 6 bottles. And then I ended up drinking them all, not in one night, in 3 nights actually, but it was so good. And then I realized that it's like a super award-winning wine with 96 Wine Spectator points, Robert Parker, James Sackley, all these people. It's just a fantastic wine. But this I didn't know, so I now have to buy them again. So yes, I do open every once in a while a bunch of bottles.
Okay, sorry, Robbie. I think we finished with the 40 minutes free Zoom call as Monetary is on a budget, and we were left
the commission as well.
So I think you said you didn't know about wines, but Bolgheri is a wonderful region in Tuscany. Grattamacco is fantastic, and so actually you bought and you tested and you knew they were very good wines. You had to buy them again. Great.
Yeah, it's not the end of the world. I mean, I'm quite happy, but yeah, no. This is to say that it's not that I did so on purpose. It happened by coincidence. But the Bulgaria for me is always a win-win. It's an easy win. But then the other wine that I love is Barbaresco. This year I've tried many. Trying to get out of Gaia, not only because it's the most expensive thing I've ever seen. It's always a nice present if you want to give me a bottle of Barbaresco from Gaia, happy to receive it. But there are plenty of other producers. Michele Chiarlo, Cortese is another one. My favorite is Rizzi, which is a relatively small producer. It has a great Barbaresco at a decent price. The most famous Pio Cesare. You have Bruno Giacosa. You have all these people. They do amazing Barbarescos. And as much as I don't have a good relationship with Barolo, we don't like each other for some reason. It always gets me in trouble. Probably I'm not sophisticated enough. But I do love Barbaresco, and all these producers are just great. Just pick up any of them. Take a Rizzi one if you find it. Just you won't go wrong with that. But the region, the sub-region that I love the most is the south of Tuscany. Is the southern part of Maremma, because Bolgheri is already there. But if you go southern than that, and closer to Lazio, you have the Maremma area, the southern Maremma, and there basically you go back to the old traditional Tuscan way of doing. So you're out of the super Tuscans. You have the classic Sangiovese 85, 90%, 95%, or 100, but it's closer to the sea. So you have these fantastic wines which are much rawer, rougher, and unsophisticated, more unsophisticated clearly than Castagneto Carducci or any good Chianti or Brunello, really not comparable, but much more straightforward, honest, and direct, and with hypertrophic tannins, which will basically dry you out of everything, of every liquid you have in your body. I love the most famous one is Morellino, but from that area. And whenever I want to feel home, although I'm not from there originally, but whenever I want to feel home, I just drink something from there. And even the whites, the Vermentino, not comparable to the Sardinians Vermentino, but still very honest. And in absolute, that's the region that I love the most. And I have plenty of wines from there, and this being in the top 5%, which I'm particularly proud of. I think for me it would land me right few steps away from alcoholism, but according to my wife, many steps after. I still argue that that's subjective, but okay. Yeah, I do have some spare bottles in case of emergency, let's say.
Oh, very well done and well said. So there's Morellino di Scansano, and the rest is under the Maremma generic label, no? EGPs or...
Yeah, when they get out of the rules, so I think there is a specific 85% or 90% of Sangiovese, and then you can play with the remaining, and that's still Morellino if it's in the area. But you have then a lot of other, experiments which are extremely nice, and then they call them, however they want. But once they get below the rules for the Morellino, below 85%, I think you cannot call it that way. But there is plenty of stuff. They do a lot of mixture with Merlot, with Cabernet, and these kind of things. So getting a bit closer to super Tuscans, but not as sophisticated and nice and costly as the big wines. But you start seeing a bit of experiments there. But even the white, I mean, the white wasn't there. Well, it was there 20 years ago, and it was awful. I mean, now they improved it a lot, by experimenting, by getting advice from the most experienced wine producers. Yeah, I mean, when we were trying to find a place where to get married, I mean, as cliche as it sounds, we wanted to find a winemaker and rent a place, or be in the middle of wine yards. Very cliche, I understand, but it reflects me, I guess. So we started, traveling around central Italy, in the Maremma in particular, but not only those. So we have seen more than 40 places. Even once we found a place, we kept doing it because it was so nice. So we started talking to the people, to the wine producers, and I've realized the one thing that makes a region or a subset of a region or even a particular wine special is really the pain and suffering around it. Or the imperfections. These I can recognize in the wine. So if the harvest was particularly problematic, weather shocks, too much sun, too much rain, the slope is difficult. You have to pick up the grapes one by one by hand, or all these kind of things. You can actually feel that in the wine, and Maremma is one area where you immediately feel that because it's more straight, while in other wines where you have more complexity, you have to find it behind a lot of other stuff. So this is why I tend to like a bit of the easiest wine comparing to the most famous brands and typical famous wine. But there are plenty of regions like that. But even international, when you see a small producer putting all the work in a wine, you immediately recognize that. I know you relate to that as well.
Yeah, but this is a romantic observation, but it's very true. I also think that the beauty around the wine manufacturing is that you can travel from your chair, you can travel the world, you can taste the flavor of nature with the grapes, but also what the weather has been, and also the human efforts to produce that. And in fact, is what you talk about. Okay, thank you very much. So focus on Italy, Tuscany, beautiful polished and less polished products. One parenthesis, we tried some very good Spanish wines together as well, which will be the new frontier to try for the next few times. And so, we'll talk about this other times. But I would say, Robbie, it has been super insightful, interesting, a pleasure. Thank you for your time. I think it has been very interesting for the audience as well. And we'll stay in touch, of course.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We should do this more often. But thanks for having me, Nico. And let's be in touch. And to everybody who's listening, just follow Monetaria.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the time.